Okay, I think we're ready to call to order the 42nd public meeting of the Massachusetts Gaming Commission on December 13th, 2012. This is the third day of addressing key policy questions. We have a chance that we might be able to get through everything before the day is out and not have to meet tomorrow. We'll just see how it goes and play it by ear. I'm sure everybody would be happy if we could make that happen. So let's start right off the bat with a series of questions, beginning with number 9 from Commissioner Zuniga.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've submitted a position paper, like everyone else has been doing, on the question number 9. The question reads, should the Commission increase the minimum licensing fee and/or the capital investment requirements? And so it's a three-part question. Should the Commission encourage bidding on the license? And if the amounts are modified, should they vary by region? I'll just go over briefly some of the considerations, some of the answers and comments that we received on my recommendation. The licensing fee, capital investment, and tax on gaming revenues are all items that are really closely correlated. Isolating or affecting one without regard to others could really have unintended consequences, but that's part of the analysis. Spectrum's report from 2008 has a series of recommendations that balance the goal of creating large destination resorts, and that's really behind the capital investment question, relative to the tax on gaming revenues as well as the licensing fee. Spectrum's report also cautions against licensing fee as a criterion for evaluation, and rather suggests that the capital investment be what applicants essentially compete on.
Is that because the point about the capital investment has a longer term impact?
That's essentially right. And just let me stay on that piece of the question, if you will. The way I think about it, and the way I believe developers will think about it, is they will assess the market and make assumptions about the revenue. They will require some kind of profitability because that's the business they're in, and thus they would leave the rest, all the cost, as the variable, if you will. Within that cost, there's two components. There's the licensing fee, clearly, and that's known at this point. And there's any number of costs that are known to them, some of which have to be assumed. But this analysis essentially leaves or suggests that fixing the revenues, understanding that the revenues are going to be what the market can bear, and understanding that they will have certain requirements of profitability, would inherently incentivize a larger capital investment. Or, perhaps said another way, if we were to affect or change the licensing fee, for example, it could come at the expense of the capital investment, because they are essentially competing for the same sort of range. I make the argument here, as it's been made by others, and there's also anecdotal evidence, that the licensing fee is a short-term gain from the Commission's perspective, whereas capital investment is clearly a longer-lasting benefit. Also, capital investment has the ability to have a portion of that come from amenities. A larger capital investment could also come in the form of larger amenities, which I would argue are perhaps some of the better in terms, benefits in terms of economic development. So for all those reasons, or let me just also state what some of the comments received. Sterling Suffolk says that takes no position but alerts the commission of the background by providing some of the legislative history, and they did indeed struggle with this and considered bidding the license and rejected that. Shevsky and Froelich.
But they did, interestingly though, they did make it not less than.
That's right.
They didn't say it is this.
It is
They
this,
said it's
right.
not less than this.
It's not less than, which is the whole reason why we're contemplating this
Right,
question.
right.
Shevsky and Froelich from the city, and the city of Springfield suggest that because the capital investment will be well above the 500 million minimum, as reported by the proposals that we see in the media, that it might not be necessary. And bidding the license may actually come at the expense of the host community agreement, rather the host and surrounding communities. They also suggest that there's a finite amount of dollars, if you will, in the cost side, whereas changing one may affect another. Foley, Hogue, and Mohegan also suggest that we should not, and they get to the point that I made previously, which is that increasing the effective tax rate directly impacts negatively the capital investment because they're inversely correlated. And MGM and Springfield makes perhaps the same, a similar comment, but with the nuance of the fact that in a competitive region versus a non-competitive, the question may be slightly different. And I guess that's a valid thing to consider. They suggest that increasing the licensing fee may be suitable for one region if there is only one bidder. Other citizens, Mr. Vignoli and Mr. Levin, suggest that yes, the license should be bid and that the license fee should be increased. So as part of my recommendation, I state that while it may be tempting to think that the minimum capital investment is currently being surpassed, as reported by some of these preliminary proposals, and while there may be still the potential for this commission to capture more value for the Commonwealth in terms of licensing fees, I believe that those are by definition short-term in nature, and if we believe and accept that the licensing fee and the capital investment are inversely correlated, that they would come at the expense of the capital investment, which is longer lasting and more desirable from an economic development standpoint. So hence my recommendation to do not increase the licensing fee, do not bid the license either, and allow for competition as the Gaming Act provides, that proponents suggest or propose the most beneficial amount of capital investment.
So you're actually, you're suggesting that we go further than the law and say, this is the license, this is the fee. Don't even leave it open to have people bid more if they want to.
Yes, that's correct.
Well, why is that going further than the law? That is the minimum set by the law.
Yes.
But it's not accepting the permission the law gives us to go higher.
Right. He's saying fix the effective
Right.
tax rate.
Right.
Well, I'm saying fix the effective tax rate by virtue of establishing the minimum.
Right.
And the tax rate comes only from the licensing fee and the tax on gaming revenue.
And other
We all-
assessments.
Right, and other assessments,
Yeah.
right.
So are you saying we would say we do not want people to bid higher? Or-
Yeah, that's
That's
my
what you're saying,
suggestion.
yeah,
That's effectively what I'm suggesting. I guess I hadn't thought of it that way, but that's effectively what I'm saying.
Right.
That the most benefit to the Commonwealth, in my opinion and view, would be derived from a larger as possible capital investment, which is also the longest lasting benefit.
Right.
This creates a level playing field. Let me also talk perhaps a little bit to varying them by region. I think the question recognizes that there could be different value, and indeed there is. The studies show that the region A has a potentially more value. It's a more valuable license. But I would think it would be very difficult to ascertain how much that variability should be proportional in terms of the license fee. One analysis that I don't suggest we should start to begin. The same approach, letting the market and the developers determine the size of the capital investment captures all of those differentials, in my view.
Thoughts, reactions?
I think this is a very thoughtful and comprehensive analysis, and I agree with it. The $85 million fee applied to some of the numbers that we've been hearing about, reading about. We don't know whether they're the real numbers or not. We won't until we get the application. Are between about 9 and 10.5% of the total investment for region for Category 1. And the $25 million is 20% of the $125 million for the slots parlor. That's a big piece of the investment, and surely is taken into account by the applicants in determining what they can afford to invest, given their target return on investment. And if there's to be bidding in a competitive area, it seems to me that the bidding ought to be in terms of investment, capital investment, not the fees, which are not going to be income-producing payments. So it seems to me that this analysis is right on the money, and we ought to, particularly given the numbers that are way above those that were projected, the minimum numbers that were talked about in the statute, we ought to stick with the set fees of 85 and 25.
I would agree. I also appreciate the background, the study, the work that was done. And yesterday, I kind of looked back to see where this $85 million goes from. It goes into a couple of different funds, and they are funds that I believe continue to be capitalized by gross gaming revenue as once a license is awarded. A simple basic of economic development. You don't look at the capacity of a business coming into your area or your city by their ability to pay, by how much you're going to charge them for a license for whatever reasons they may need a license. And understanding that an operator is still going to have to pay some pretty hefty, probably building permit fees to a local municipality. I subscribe to the fact that I prefer to see the money invested in the project as opposed to creating any sort of imbalance or any type of bidding process for the license fee.
Yep, this made perfect sense to me in reading it. You wrote it in a way that, for us non-financial folks, it was easy to understand, and it made a lot of sense, so I'm in complete agreement.
Well, I also like the analysis, and I think your basic point, looking at it holistically, makes a lot of sense. And if you push here and something happens over here, that's definitely right. And we, pursuant to the conversations we've been having about questions about sections 1, 9, 15, 18, we're all going to be giving thoughts about what we think the evaluation criteria are, and probably talking about the kinds of amenities we hope to see included in a destination resort, and so I think all that makes sense. And I agree with you that that is where we would rather, if there's a clear trade-off, that's where we'd rather see the money go. On the other hand, you know, look like we're moving towards increasingly getting a pretty competitive environment. And there seems to be increasing interest in all of the licenses. So if we have really robust competition, I don't know that, I think it does make sense, and we will be doing this to articulate that we're going to be weighing very heavily the capital investment and where the capital investment's going to go and what the amenities and the associated tourist benefits and so forth are going to be. That should be clear. But to say don't increase the amount seems a little counter something or other. I mean, I don't know that it's such a precise action. If you're really competitive, and if you read the stories about competition in other markets, the competition gets pretty hot and heavy. And I don't know that there's an exact trade-off. If I bid $100 million, I'm going to take $15 million out of my capital. So I would think I would lean, I don't know, I hear the point. We're sort of forcing, in effect, we're trying to force investment into the best long-term investment. And that makes sense to me. But, that to have Western Mass be 85 and Eastern Mass be 85, even we know there's not similar in the licenses are not of similar value, albeit it's hard to quantify the difference. I don't see why we want to actually cap it at 85. Why wouldn't we just say, that's one of the things, it is a minimum. We're not going to talk a lot about encouraging that to go up. We're not going to, as we put our evaluation criteria, that will be relatively low on the, relative to some other things.
Well,
but why take it off? If people are really going at it, and they're trying to throw everything against the wall to win, why not give them a chance to jack that one up too?
Let me take, it becomes a question of, at least purely from an economic standpoint, a question of a short-term gain versus one that is in the future. And in order to compare them, by definition, compare the two. If somebody, let's say, says, we have $5 million more upfront, we're willing to bid $80 million, it's 85, the licensing fee, right? We're willing to put in a $90 million just because we want to be competitive. That $5 million would have to be compared against a difference that's in the future in capital investment. And by definition, you would then have to, in order to bring it to today, you'd have to figure out a discount rate. And that discount rate is really the subject of a lot of economic projections that are never quite, on point. The discount rate, is we could look at interest rates, we could look at projections, but we could look at any number of other. It's not going to be an exact measure. And part of that, part of the analysis in here is fix the things we know and allow everybody else to in at least one that we can control, and allow everyone else compete in one dimension, which is the future benefits. We'd still have to analyze how soon those benefits get realized, and this, I think, should be part of the criteria. But that's going to come, I believe, in the phasing plan, in the construction plan, in the readiness, et cetera. But introducing yet another variable in that analysis, I suggest would be too complex.
There's also, and I subscribe to that analysis, but there's also, isn't there another piece to this, and that is the glitter piece. Somebody comes in and doesn't go up 5 million, they go up 30 million. And then the commission, let's just put a bid on the table that's going to stand out there and glitter. That money would have to come from someplace, and yet it would be a number that, to the public consciousness, would look much bigger than the other numbers, and have the commission, if it chose to reject that, having the criticism of turning down the large bid and going with some subpar bidder who was bidding a lot less, and it seems to me it would put an outsized pressure or an outsized has the potential for putting an outsized pressure or an outsized set of expectations on the outcome of the application process. And it would be much better to channel competition into the more difficult to define, but much better in the long-term process of the economic investment that was going to go into the facilities.
I agree. I think going on money alone, sorry, I didn't let you finish. But
No.
yeah, just bidding up the process doesn't seem to be the way we should be making this determination. And I don't know that it'll be that difficult to differentiate between projects where one may have substantially more money, but with that money are amenities, obviously, that's what you're paying. So I don't know that it'll be that difficult to really differentiate between a couple of bids if one is offering substantially more than the other, and we think that will attract more people.
Well, I would argue that the fact that this number has been out there since the legislation was passed has given proponents a basis for making all the assumptions relative to the capital investment that they would be willing to put out there, or even their proposals, or even the attractiveness of Massachusetts. I suggest changing that could have a disruption in that basis as well.
You guys have any thoughts particularly?
I would harken back to the discussion we had yesterday. My only thought would be to harken back to the discussion we had yesterday about over-promising, and I think maybe Commissioner McHugh was hinting at that I'm not sure this is so much different from promising to build a school or promising to build a hospital, promising to pay a little more in license fee. All of that is encompassed in the whole picture of what the financial viability of those promises are. And then your evaluation would be, can they afford what they've promised? And if they can't, if they've promised too much, if they say they're going to pay $30 million more than anybody else for their license, but they really aren't going to be able to be financially viable by doing that, that's an important thing to know and evaluate. If they say they're going to build a hospital, but they can't really afford to do that, to me, they're kind of equivalent. And to not permit someone who maybe can afford to pay more for the license fee to do that, I'm not sure that's necessarily the best approach.
Can I ask you all to introduce yourselves before you speak, as we have a new person doing the stenography for us?
Okay, well, we've already introduced ourselves, but it's Guy, Michael and Carol.
And Mike Pollock, Spectrum Gaming Group.
That would just be my impression.
We did warn in our 2008 report against the possibility of being overly dependent or leaning towards bids that did place an undue emphasis on the license fee and or the tax rate, precisely for the scenario that Commissioner McHugh did delineate. Part of we're aware of the arguments in favor of going for the highest license fee and the highest tax rate. And they usually are essentially based on the fact that you've got a limited number of licenses to be issued. There is inherently value in that. Consequently, why give that away? But I would caution that that's not necessarily applicable in this instance, because you do have and are developing such a robust competitive bidding process that that argument would more likely hold water in a scenario, for example, as occurs in many states where there's a racetrack that you're going to be issuing a license to. There's not a competitive bidding process. Why give that away? And I would question that there
Why
are
give-
instances.
why give what away? I don't know if I follow you.
Why give that license away in the absence of a license fee?
Yeah.
And I would caution that there are examples to be, Indiana as one example. There were 2 licenses issued in the Indianapolis market, and the fee, is, my recollection, is $250 million per license. And consequently, as a result, both of those ultimate operators went through bankruptcy. And in my recollection is that in both instances, that they were not arguably able to construct or build what they otherwise perhaps would have or could have built.
But we're
Because-
going to have to go through that analysis anyway. I mean, that's, you know, whether they bid 85 or 112, you know, that is part of our analysis, whether they can afford to put in $1 billion. So I don't see why that bears on this. It suggests not, like we talked about yesterday, not putting bidders into the mode that the cable companies were, you know, in the early days of bidding on cable franchises, and we agree with that. I totally agree with that. But that's not what we're talking about. It's more if you've got, you know, for a bidder, I'm not sure this the glitz a bad thing. If you've got a bidder who can afford it, which is an important question, and they do everything they can, they go as high on the capital side, but the difference on the capital side, if one guy is at $1.1 billion and another person to go at $1.13 billion, isn't really material. But if you take your licensing fee from 85 to 115, you add 30 million to your licensing fee, I think that is material, would be perceived as material. And I think you're overestimating the precision of the analysis. You know, this is a subjective bidding process. I've been in many of these bidding processes. You go in and you think at first, I need to get my 20% return on capital, but, you know, all of a sudden the competition starts getting stiff, and you say, well, you know what, we can do it for a little less. If we can get 17 out of this, we'll be okay, and pretty soon you're down to 12 and happy to have it, you know, so.
But there's many.
But why wouldn't you, I understand that, but why, if the bidding got that tough, why wouldn't you prefer to channel people into throwing in a hospital as opposed to throwing in $30 million?
Well, you can't build a hospital for $30 million. I mean, that's what I'm
A
saying.
little hospital, an outpatient clinic.
A hospice,
I mean,
maybe a hospice.
A win.
Well, yeah,
I don't think it's an either or, that's what I'm saying. I don't think it's not such a precise even or. And if we really get hot bidding, you know, look what's going on in Springfield, you know, are they gonna be turned off? Are they gonna, you know, nickel and dime on $10 or $15 million on a license fee? Is that gonna get snuck out of the capital? I mean, out of their billion, they're 900 million, it just doesn't seem, so to just, I'm with you, just to voluntarily take it off the table.
Well,
But I'm not suggesting that that's going to be the determining factor at all. It's not going to be whoever offers the highest
No, I don't.
license
Right,
fee
right.
gets the license. It's just the whole package, part of the package.
In our 2008 analysis, we did not, my recollection, and I believe it's accurate, we did not recommend capping it per se, but considering it as one of the factors, but not necessarily giving undue emphasis to it.
That I would totally agree with. You know, it's the capping it that I'm having trouble with.
well, I want to pick up on something that you may be alluding to, Michael, which is, it is possible, I wasn't there for when they drafted it, but it is possible that no less than 85 million could apply for the time of a renewal, because these licenses are 15 years, if I'm
Right.
mistaken. So at the time of renewal, which is the example that you were saying that comes into bear, if we were to renew, somebody after us were to renew that license, it should not be less than 85 million, but it could go a lot more because the circumstances will be totally different at that time. So the no less, I suggest that this could be at least one scenario in which that may have been.
Well, that could be, but I think it's pretty clear that the legislature meant what they said. That they said it's no less than 85, and they were talking about now. They might have been talking then too, but I think it's pretty hard to argue that they didn't mean to make it potentially higher. All right, well, any other
No,
thoughts?
I have nothing
Okay,
else.
thank you. I would be very much in favor, I appreciate the analysis, I agree with it. I would be very much in favor as we lay out the evaluation criteria, which Commissioner McHugh is going to be working on, and we're all going to be pitching into, on making it clear that amenities, destination, international travel, et cetera, capital investment, long-term investment, jobs, those are the high priorities. I would not take a higher one-time fee off the table. I would strongly urge that we leave it on the table as yet another thing they can do if they want to, on the theory that we will tell them where the high-value investment is, but, you know, an aggressive competitor, we give them the tools to use everything, and they have every tool in their arsenal. Any other comments? You want to move your?
Yeah, well, I do recommend that the commission do not increase the licensing fee, and thus allow competition in the investment amount, in the capital investment amount, recognizing that the two may be inversely correlated. And that's.
With the critical thing being, and thus, what you're saying, cap the investment fee is what you're saying.
Do not increase the licensing fee.
And do not permit. Do we have the right to not permit people to bid more? Can we preclude them?
Well, we can certainly set a fee. Yeah, we can set a fixed fee, or we can set a fee that, you know, that we can do either one.
So by the legislature saying not less than, it gives us the authority to
Right.
cap it if we want to. Okay. So that's the essential
Yeah,
point.
well, I would go,
I
in my
think we say it
recommendation,
straight,
to
yeah.
cap it, to set it as, my recommendation is that the commission set the fee as currently stated in the statutes, 85 million and 25 million for type 1 and type 2 respectively.
Second?
Second.
Any more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Nay? The ayes have it.
Thank you.
Commissioner Zuniga.
Okay, policy question number 10. How should the commission determine a suitable debt-to-equity ratio for applicants for a gaming license? I referenced the section 414 that specifically states in the Gaming Act that the commission shall have the powers necessary to determine a suitable debt-to-equity ratio for applicants. I suggest that this piece could be interpreted as having the authority to determine different debt-to-equity ratios for different types of licenses, perhaps even for different levels of investment, and perhaps even at different times. I also suggest in some of the considerations here that debt-to-equity ratio is clearly just one factor in determining financial stability and financial suitability. There's many others. I just picked up a couple here, mostly having to do with cash flow, free cash flow from operations, the financial and operational strength of subsidiaries, parent companies, other partnerships are also going to bear into mind here, complicating, if you will, the equation on financial suitability. I also suggest that not all debt, or equity for that matter, is going to be the same across applicants. Some applicants may be able to finance these projects with higher rated debt than others, just by virtue of, how their balance sheets look. And I do go on to say that Section 10 of the Gaming Act, Section 10A, requires that the applicant deposit 10% of the investment into an interest-bearing account, either as cash or as a bond, or for the benefit of the commission. And suggest that, something like this would have to come into the mix when determining equity participation. It occurs to me that we would get the question, how would we count those monies when deposited, as equity or as debt, if we were to determine a debt-to-equity ratio. I touched on the notion that our understanding and our consultants tell us these projects are recently being put together with a very complex set of financing structure, different levels of debt. There's going to be senior and subordinate positions to all the debt that they enter into. They're going to have very different equity participation. These are multiple partners that come in at different times with seniority on the equity payouts. And some of them come with in-kind participation. There will be operators whose asset comes from their ability, their branding, their ability to operate, which is in kind and in the future. So all those things start to come as part of the analysis if we were to determine a priori a suitable debt-to-equity ratio. We received a couple of comments on this notion. Sterling Suffolk suggests no. They're really silent. They do suggest, however, that the ratio in a vacuum would be arbitrary and by itself not determine financial stability, which I argued just a little while ago. Shevsky and Froelich with the City of Springfield has a qualified yes. And the qualified notion comes from the fact that they recognize and suggest that each one of these determinations would have to be made on a case-by-case basis because of many of the factors that I just spoke about. These are different structures in terms of equity participation, just to name one complicating factor. So as my recommendation, I suggest that given that the debt-to-equity ratio is just one of several factors to determine financial stability, and given that the mandate of the Commission really is to ensure financial stability on an ongoing basis, not just at the time of receipt of applications, the Commission should really think about these as an ongoing effort and should establish procedures relative to a financial risk assessment. This risk assessment could be made at any time, certainly at the time of receipt of proposals. It could be done by experts in the financial and debt structuring arena. We could also put an onus on the applicant to report to the Commission when they believe that their operations, their financial operations, may be reaching areas of stress or what have you. And thus I recommend against a preemptive number, but perhaps in regulations certain tests like what New Jersey has, and there's others that have that, that are perhaps come from all different angles. Are you able to meet your payroll? Are you able to meet your obligations, your wagering, first of all, your taxes, certainly your payroll, your debt, and is there enough reserves? Are you funding your reserves adequately? In other words, a host of a financial risk assessment rather than one ratio at any given point.
So the net is?
The net is that we do not determine a debt-to-equity ratio. We allow ourselves, we do put in place, and this should be in regulation, certain tests, like I suggest here. Mostly they come from New Jersey. I added one relative here, number F, a satisfactory completion of a financial risk assessment as determined by the Commission. This is something that we have the authority to do at any given point, and that's very powerful. We could again ask applicants to, on a quarterly basis, certify to a number of things, like that they have adequate reserves, that they have adequate comfort in terms of meeting obligations. We could ask, and will be asking, for audited financial statements, et cetera. But I believe we could place the onus on reporting on the applicant, and which could by itself trigger a financial risk assessment at any given point. And so I recommend that as my approach. I recommend that, that's my recommendation too, in terms of approach.
Comments?
That makes sense to me. I'm not sure what you learned from just looking at a debt-to-equity ratio. This is not my area of expertise, but you have two companies, and they both have $25 million of equity and $100 million of debt. But one of the debts is sort of paying junk bond interest rates, and the other's paying AAA interest rates. You've got the same debt-to-equity ratio, but you've got vastly different operating costs and ultimately viability. So it seems to me an overall picture as to which the debt-to-equity ratio as one factor would be the better approach.
Yet only that the debt-to-equity, it comes really from a snapshot coming from the balance sheet. And it's important to take snapshots, certainly from time to time, but I would argue that other ratios like cash flow from operations to net income is one that gives a much better idea as to solvency and the ability to meet obligations on an ongoing basis, on a slightly more ongoing basis. So that's not to say not apply the debt-to-equity ratio. We have the ability to do that at any point. I just don't
But it's one of many, right?
want to do it on a vacuum.
Yeah. Others?
Again, well written, well thought out, makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think the concomitant to doing what I think we'll do here, which is say no, is, as you suggested, we should publish pretty soon what the financial evaluation tools are. If we're going to adopt New Jersey Plus, we should, whatever it is, but maybe we could have the follow-on, if you'd be willing to do that, take the follow-on responsibility of taking the lead on, maybe in collaboration with the consultants, taking the lead on figuring out what is the financial evaluation mechanism that we're going to use, because people will want to know that pretty soon. Any other discussion? You want to make a motion?
Thank you, yes. So I recommend that this commission do not establish a debt-to-equity ratio at this point, but in lieu of that, research and establish in regulations a series of tests designed to assess the financial risk of our applicants at any given point in the future.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Okay, rolling right along, number 11.
Yep. Thank you. Policy question number 11 states that should the commission allow a facility to open in stages with the casino opening prior to the hotel and/or other facilities? And if so, under what constraints and conditions? In the same venue, I have placed a couple of considerations for discussion, the comments we received and the recommendations. Considerations, perhaps stating the obvious, the state generates direct value in allowing a casino to generate a gaming revenue as quickly as possible. There would be, if we were to allow for the opening in stages, like the Gaming Act does allow, there would clearly be a number of conditions articulated with it, relative to certificate of occupancy, completion of all the permitting requirements, assurances that the building is safe and secure, and that the completion of the phases complies with all the operation regulations and conditions set forth by the statute. I make an argument here that, like in policy question number 9, imposing a strict restriction on phasing may result in a lower level of capital investment because there's an additional cost that goes with opening a very large casino project in one phase, which is a carried interest cost. If the commission or if the operator is not able to start getting cash flow at some time prior to completion of all its phases, the level of investment would have to include carried interest. They would have to borrow that much more money to complete it all, and because the revenues are further out in the future, there's a higher cost of capital, and thus have a direct adverse effect on capital investment. How much, I don't know, but the point is made. There's also another less financial aspect, but I think relevant, which is that there will be at least two known proponents, but perhaps more, where they will have an operation while building something in the same site. That could very well be a racing operation. And that racing operation, the commission would be in a position to perhaps have an interest in furthering those racing operations as much as possible in our dual role of a racing regulator. But even if this weren't a racing operator, anybody with an existing site or an existing hotel, let's say, would by definition have to entertain phasing, in my view. I mean, this is just a hypothetical, but it's an informed one. So, needless to say that as the Gaming Act allows, the Commission could place on applicants the burden of demonstrating that the phasing plan satisfies all the criteria in the statute, and it could place all the conditions articulated there as well. We could also further impose statutory penalties on the applicant's inability to meet any of the interim milestones if there were to be a phasing plan. We need not wait until the final milestone is not done. So we received a couple of responses here. Sterling Suffolk says that this should be analyzed on a case-by-case. The Gaming Act does specifically allow it and imposes penalties for non-completion. They make the argument that I've made before, allowing stages would generate economic benefits earlier. And this should also be considered in the context of other requirements like MIPA permitting and local requirements. Shevsky and Froelich and the City of Springfield say that it's really up to the Commission. The city, however, intends to require it all in a single phase. Foley, Hogan, Mohegan suggest that yes, we should. The Act specifically authorizes the facility to open gaming prior to completion of the entire facility. And MGM Springfield suggests no, the Commission runs the risk of the winning applicant delaying completion of the project and frustrating a major goal of the statute. My recommendation is recognizing that the Commonwealth stands to derive the most economic benefit in the form of gaming revenues and investment amount if it allows phases, mostly from a timing perspective. It all depends as to how we do that. By their very nature, these are very large projects. These are of mixed use. Large real estate projects are bulky, and they effectively are designed and constructed in phases. There's what we're really talking about is opening. They will be built in different phases. They cannot really be built everybody at the same time. So a key aspect of phasing, I suggest, is what gets built first, what is operational first, and whether that makes sense to open at what stage in the phasing, in the construction period. So my recommendation is that we do allow the phasing of projects. We do look at them on a case-by-case basis. We could impose penalties for non-completion on interim milestones. If we have different phases, each phase, if you will have an interim milestone. We need not wait until non-completion, let's say, of the final phase to impose penalties. And that will make everybody act to the best of their abilities in a phasing plan.
Comments?
Are you saying we could or should impose penalties?
Well, this goes back to the case-by-case basis, I suspect. I'm suggesting we should not just look at the statute and read that the penalty comes at the end. We have to talk about that, decide whether the $50 million penalty would be adequate on an early stage. I'm going to suggest that it's not. There are ways in every schedule. If you miss the first milestone, there's ways to mitigate in a later phase. So I'm not suggesting that we should be punitive, let's say, or preemptively punitive. But I'm suggesting that the ability to impose penalties is a big incentivizer in meeting all the stages in a phasing plan.
Here's I'm really torn on this one, and would like to hear more discussion and hear from the consultants. It seems to me that the enforceability of the phasing commitment is the biggest concern. And put to one side for a minute what you said, that these things can't be built together. They have to be built in phases. I'd like to come back to that at some point. But the phasing, the enforceability of the phasing commitment depends on the ability of the developer to pay the monetary fee. The enforceable, you could forfeit the license, but that is not an economic advance of the type we're looking for, right? So you could enforce the phasing requirement by requiring a big upfront bond. But if you required a big upfront bond, the premium for the bond or the cash set aside, the lost opportunity cost, would perhaps be as large as the cost of the economic cost of building out the casino, the rest of it. And if you don't do that, but you have penalties that accrue for missing various phases, you're likely to run into a situation where the phases aren't being completed on time because there is no financial ability to complete the phases. And if there's no financial ability to complete the phases, how are you going to collect? Is there going to be a financial ability to pay? Now, I'm sure there's answers to all those questions, but those are the things that are...
Well, that argument is the same whether you have phases or whether you have one large project. If you don't have, the penalty comes if you don't complete. It's $50 million as per the Gaming Act, and if you're not going to complete your project, let's say, there's reasons behind it. Probably you're running out of money. That's the usual suspect. How are you really going to collect the $50 million? It really comes from the 10% that they deposit at the beginning, and that is going to happen regardless of whether we allow phases or whether we allow one phase.
And we wouldn't have done our job with the initial vetting if there's a chance that they could not finish the phases. The whole point of the financial evaluation we're going to be doing, is to make sure they can deliver on their promises.
Well, I understand that, but it's, but if they need, if the proposal is that we need to do it in phases, because we need the operating income in order to deliver what we promised, we are, and we approve that, we're taking necessarily a higher risk of non-completion than if we say, you've got to show us a financing plan that will get you through this without the operational income, right?
Could you
Or is
repeat
that
that? In what scenario is the higher risk of non-completion?
Higher risk of non-completion is if you need operating income in order to complete the project.
I would make the argument against that for the same reason,
Why?
actually.
Why?
You're going to build something that costs $800 million.
Right.
You either borrow the $800 million at different points in time, or you could borrow a little less. If you are at any given point prior to all its expenditures able to fund from your operations some of the ongoing capital requirements. In other words, phase 3 or 5. My upfront cash need is lower, and thus my risk is a little lower. Now, there are many risks that remain in both sets. There's completion risk for all kinds of technical reasons. If there's all kinds of unsuitable materials in the site, or or whatever it may be, but my risk is mitigated because I don't have to borrow as much
I hear you.
upfront.
I hear you.
Now, we are not in that position. We're in the position of benefiting from, but I guess that argument is already made, from the revenues that will come to the state, because we derive 25% of those revenues. Now, all of these, and I think this has been made in the past, the casinos will have to weigh, and this is part of their branding and part of their strategy, how much do they want to open perhaps on temporary, I don't want to call it temporary, permanent space, but on a permanent, on a temporary location, let's say, and give away the impression that this is it, perhaps, where the larger and better came in afterwards. Some first impressions, considerations will be, this is really their business. And what I'm suggesting is, let them propose, let them be creative, let them tell us what is their strategy. If they do want to open all in one phase because they want to have one big opening, the grand opening.
And I think it's incumbent upon us to, if we allow phasing, to make sure it's appropriate, to make sure what gets open first is an attractive piece of the property that will continue to exist. It's not temporary. For example, if you open, a casino floor, that may not be the end all, but it's attractive. It'll eventually be a concert hall, whatever. And you don't open a water park or a golf course immediately. But you do, it would be important that we approve something that is very, very attractive and we think has value in opening in phases. You are bringing revenue to the economy much sooner also that way in allowing phases. And in learning about this, it can be done well, and penalties, I think, are a part of that, though. That really significant penalties helps
Right.
folks keep on
It's a tremendous
on track.
incentive. There's from what I understand, and just because we're familiar with Massachusetts, certain sites may not be, all that easy to say, let's just get everybody in here. There may be some demolition, there may be some remediation, there may be existing use, existing operations on a number of, and those, the way to deal with those things from a logistical standpoint is to do it in phases. So
I think we've definitely seen anecdotal evidence of phasing and where phasing has worked well. You just got back from New Orleans, where that seemed to be a phased-in approach for the casino that was selected there.
Which didn't work very well.
Yeah, but that was a phasing dictated by a lot of, we wouldn't want that kind of phasing, let me put it that way. I think.
Well, let me find another wonderful anecdotal valid comparison of phasing. I mean, you know, reading about the opening of the casino in Cincinnati, they have decided not to build a hotel until area hotels were at 60% occupancy.
Right.
So I qualify that with having not been to Cincinnati, so I can't tell you again how well it's working or not working.
Right.
I would also speculate that we may not actually get a project that is a phased-in project before this commission. I would harbor a guess at the local level that the difference between a project that's going to do it all at once or a project that's going to phased in may be decided for somewhat at the local level. Local voters may choose a project that is not going to be phased in over one that is
Which
going
was
to be
one of the
phased in.
comments that Commissioner Zillier read, that Springfield is, his mayor is saying there won't be any phasing in Springfield.
Yeah, and that could drive what we see. I guess, and finally, my last point is we look to the evaluation criteria in section 18. You know, just, we're going to evaluate somebody on, you know, a particular example, estimated recapture of gaming-related spending by residents. Well, a phased-in project is not going to be able to probably meet that standard better than a complete project. So I'm not necessarily saying we shouldn't allow phased-in. Again, I think a phased-in project, if done correctly, could in the long run have a maximum benefit, get us the project that we want. I would just want us to be considerate of our evaluation criteria and evaluating one license where it's a complete project done versus an applicant who comes before us with a phased-in project to at least understand that we're going to evaluate them, not make our criteria, I guess, discriminatory towards a phased-in approach.
Let me make sure I understand a little. I think by their very nature, any phasing, and frankly, a lot of the details relative to construction on these projects are going to be substantially different among them, because they're going to be in different places, in different communities, and with different types of use. And I don't think we should attempt to evaluate the merits of the phasing of one project against another one without phasing in a different community. Is that what you're suggesting?
If we get two license applications here from Region 1, one is not a phased-in project, one is a phased-in project. And I completely understand and validate all the reasons that might come up for someone to suggest a phased-in approach. My concern, and maybe as we go through and look through Section 18, and we begin to think about how we will rank and score that evaluative process, that we be fair as we lay out that evaluative process. It won't favor a complete project over a phased-in project.
Okay, yeah, I understand that. Well, I think the way to compare those really comes from the economic benefits. If, and this is certainly part of the criteria in the highest and best value to the Commonwealth, if because of a phasing plan, one project derives revenues quicker than one without phasing because the revenues are further out in the future, well, forget the phasing. It's the revenues that are really making this one a lot more valuable to the Commonwealth.
That may be. But if the non-phasing one was built hypothetically with cash on hand as opposed to borrowed money, and therefore was a safer bet to come to completion, that might be a factor that would cut slightly the other way. But I hear your point. But but I'm not sure that you couldn't take into account in some way. But we don't have to decide that today.
Right.
Could we hear the consultant's view on this issue?
Just say our recent experience, and this relates to Singapore, whereby those projects opened 2.5 years ago and are just now being completed. The government essentially required a certain minimum opening situation where the casino and other amenities open, but the museums, the gardens, the Universal, the aquariums, all those things phased in over the last 2.5 years. And I think from a licensing perspective, you're going to be looking at the financial stability and financial integrity of these companies on an ongoing basis, both from the licensing perspective and the second phase perspective. And you can balance all of these issues by requiring a mix of amenities and non-gaming versus the gaming as the projects are being phased in. These are all balances, the jobs, the revenues, the phasing, the complete projects. At the end of the day, though, there should be a commitment and a commitment that's supported by regulation and by the commission that what they say they're going to build and what you're basing your licensing and decisions on is going to happen in real time, in real world. So that's how we would recommend you approach this.
And how did what was the Singapore insurance policy, if you will? Was it bonds? Was it?
Well, I believe the projects were essentially funded at the time. The commitments to fund the projects were made at the time the licenses were awarded. I could be wrong on that, but that's what my recollection is.
Mm-hmm. But the financing was all in place.
Essentially. And they did use, operating revenues from the time they opened over the last 2.5 years to help fund these projects as well, as you've indicated. But I believe, and I know there was a commitment that was given at the time the licenses were awarded, that the projects as submitted would be built. There was no give on that whatsoever. In fact, the properties opened, they were required to open by the government within the time frame that they submitted. So the government held them accountable to what was submitted by the licensees at the time.
And significant penalties.
Yes, as you recall.
Significant, which caused them to work very quickly to complete.
Yeah, fast-track the projects.
Yeah, but beating a dead horse, but the penalties are only as good as the ability of the penalized to meet them. And I wondered if there was a bond or what it was.
Well, I don't recall if there was a bond or not. I wouldn't be surprised. I don't recall, but, that went into, in part, the financial soundness of the projects and the entities comprising the project. Remember, these are not just one entity, they're a combination, a consortium.
Okay.
I just wanted to add to that, Commissioner McHugh. Your approval eventually would be on the whole project as a whole anyway, and you can add conditions to that license that would contain both progress requirements and disincentives for interfering with that progress. We've been involved with a lot of phased-in projects over the years. As Commissioner Zuniga has mentioned before, it gives developers additional tools in terms of their plans from a capital investment point of view to have anticipated revenues at an earlier stage by phasing, and you can build in a sufficient safeguard system, which would be composed of both penalties from a punitive point of view, conditions in terms of, hey, you can lose the whole license here unless you show, what you complete what you've said you're going to complete. And that can be reviewed in conjunction with a constant monitoring of their financial status, along with the type of things we talked about before in the earlier question, that would give you sufficient presence to monitor and be able to have assurances that it's not going to be something that's going to be built, then a complaint that, well, we've run out of money, we can't go any further. The penalties would be severe in that regard.
Thank you.
Thank you. My sense is we definitely should not preclude phasing. This is totally a situation where the devil's in the details. My concern would be that we could end up opening 3 or 4 slots parlors and have 3 or 4 slots parlors in Massachusetts for 2 years. And that's not, I think, what this was meant to do. So, you know, what phasing, whether and what we would approve is a question that remains to be seen, but we clearly shouldn't preclude it as a possibility.
Yeah, no, and it's, again, in the details.
Right.
If presented with a plan that only opens slots parlor gaming floor without any amenities, I would suggest that that would not be approved by this commission. Of course, that time is hypothetical in the future.
Right. So, do you want to frame your motion?
Yep, so I therefore move that this commission do not preclude facilities to be open, constructed in phases, and allow proponents to present as part of their submission and any information afterwards, detailed plans as to the construction and operations and opening of the facilities.
Right. But this implies neither an approval nor a disapproval.
That's right.
Of a phased-in program, only that we would not preclude that possibility.
Preclude that.
Right, okay,
We will do what the Gaming Act does, which is allow for the possibility.
right. Second? Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it.
Could I just raise one question there, and we need not resolve it today, but the Springfield comment raises a question that may have to be resolved at some time, and that is, what if a local community says no phasing, and we are prepared to allow phasing? I'm not prepared to debate that today, to come to a decision on it today. But it does seem to me, in line with some of the discussions we had before, that we have 3 sets of concerns here. We've got a concern with respect to the host community, which is largely the host community's responsibility. We've got a concern for surrounding communities, which is a little bit more in our ballpark. And we've got a concern with the region, which is entirely in our ballpark. And it may be that there is a regional benefit from an earlier opening that results from a phased approach, that a delay for a complete build-out wouldn't serve. I just raised that hypothetically. I think it's worthwhile having further discussions about that at some point. I don't think there's any reason to
Well,
get.
yeah, I raised the same question. Can we override an HCA on this issue? I actually do think this is as key policy a question as there is, because we know Springfield is going down the road pretty quickly on this very point. So maybe we should talk about it. I'm seeing.
Well, I think we should talk about it in an early stage. I would like to talk further with the Springfield folks about that, about the issue, and see, before we took a position, if we couldn't find out more about the approach and the reasons for it, and see if there really is an issue. And then talk, if there is, about what the remedies might be. The remedies might be, we say we can override it, then we play that out. Remedies might also be in a competitive district that we will perhaps favor a proposal that's built in phases over one that's got to be built all at once, so.
Or the other way around.
Or the other way around, right.
I believe the teeth, as far as I can ascertain them here, come from the ability of the commission to allow for gaming, to open the gaming floor. That ability resides only with the commission. So we have the ability to say, now you can conduct games, or you cannot yet. But that doesn't take away from your point, and I understand it.
I'm not sure that we have the power to issue a occupancy permit.
No, we do not.
Right.
And we would not,
So,
we would not No, we would not do that.
Right, so our ability to say now you can play games,
Yeah, well,
may be games in a park, but maybe not games in a building.
well, yeah, no, I did speak to subject to all conditions,
Right.
like
Right.
safe and secure, certificate of occupancy, well, that.
Just for the record, my predisposition on this is that this would be something that would be within the HCA. You know, if a community wants to negotiate, if the mayor feels strongly that he wants to negotiate an HCA with, that requires no phasing, you know, my instinct would be that's well within their authority.
That's my default as
Yeah.
well, but I would
Yeah,
just
okay.
like to pursue that
Well,
through conversation.
Well, for the record, me too. I'm only suggesting at this point that if
Right.
they suggest, if they
Yeah.
all agree.
Right.
Right.
Well, would one or the other of you pursue that? Because I do think we should make a decision on that in the next 2-3 weeks if we possibly can. So maybe between you and Commissioner Zuniga,
All right.
do whatever you want to do to tee that up for a decision.
Also benefit to reach out to the folks in Holyoke as well.
Well, and the mayor, you know, the mayor of Boston has said that he doesn't want any phasing too. So there's a lot of people that are already invested in this.
Should I continue to policy question number 15?
Yes, thank you. Oh, no, we didn't vote, did we? Did we vote? Yes, we did vote.
We did.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Policy question number 15, what degree of building design completion will be required before the licensing selection? And I don't know if you saw my attachment to this memo. It was a little printout from the American Institute of Architects website. A little
I didn't know what that was for. I
Okay.
didn't see it, but I didn't know what it's for.
Okay. It essentially defines the basic services of the architect in the three phases that three major phases that I go here to articulate, which is schematic design, design development, and construction documents phases. Perhaps in addition to these, prior to a schematic design, and I'm sorry this is not in the memo, there's conceptual level design, and that can have many meanings, from just a pretty drawing to a lot more detail, thus getting close to a schematic design. And the difference that I would stress between a conceptual design and a schematic design is that schematic design starts to have dimensions that are very important for certain things that will have a lot of bearing to communities and to this commission. Height, area, things that start to affect communities, stormwater runoff, etc. So I suggest as part of the considerations that at a minimum the specifications, plans, and drawings would have to be at a level that would facilitate the initial MIPA reviews. And we've talked a little bit about that. There's an environmental notification form that these projects will have to start filing as part of the mitigation efforts, and the design has to allow, the studies have to allow for that sort of, will actually require that there's enough information to proceed with that process. I also go on to suggest that applicants will have a track record of casino design and construction, and this commission could look at that. And will likely have the ability to see design criteria, use of materials, and that sort of thing that is usually referred to and helpful if we were looking only at conceptual designs. Part of the comments that we received were from Sterling Suffolk. The commission has the authority to defer to agencies with statutory authority on the various issues, transportation, environmental protection, and permitting. Applicants should demonstrate that they have met the statutory requirements and evaluated criteria while filing for permits in parallel. The comments.
What does that mean?
In my view, the comment really didn't address the question relative to the level of design. They're loosely alluding to the fact that it would have to be such, the level of design, that it allows for all those things to happen, some of which might have to be done in parallel.
But it should demonstrate the applicant should demonstrate to us that it has the capacity to meet whatever DOT, DEP, MEPA requirements exist.
Correct.
It's really conflating with the license, the permitting question that we talked about
Right.
yesterday.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But
There's a little bit of overlap, but.
Right. Shevsky and Froelich, the City of Springfield state that concept designs drawn to scale, floor plans, detailed finishes, building elevations, landscaping, and surrounding areas will have to be part of the submission.
now, does that fit in, I'm sorry to keep interrupting, but, I mean, your analysis is thorough, but, you know, the format is unfamiliar. Does that comply with the schematic design stage? Or is
Not
it-
necessarily, not necessarily. And hence, perhaps our need to have to define what stage
I see.
of the design.
Concept would be a precursor to.
Concept, yeah.
schematic.
Right.
Now, concept has a varying degree of detail. I could draw up a concept in 5 minutes, and that's utterly inadequate. Or there could be a lot of work, including studies, behind a conceptual design. And of course,
Yeah, they're talking about floor plans,
Yes.
detailed finishes, elevations, or elevations as opposed to landscaping.
correct.
So they're talking about something more than just the back of the envelope
Absolutely,
concept.
absolutely. The thing is that schematic design is a widely accepted, it's widely accepted as the first formal phase in architectural design, which is what I'm going to argue is the level that we should be
Okay.
looking for. Several citizens, Vignoli, Robinson, and Cataldo, submitted comments relative to saying that the design should be complete, and I don't believe they appreciate the nuance between the different phases of the design development, schematic design, and construction drawings. I'm coming at it, I'm going to come at this from the back end, if you will. It would be impractical and unnecessary for us to require construction drawings. I think that's clearly stated. There is a lot of detail that goes above the ceilings and behind the walls that we don't need to know for the award of license. We could keep working ourselves backwards from that, backwards. And there's a lot of detail that does go on in the design development as well that I don't believe is necessary. I believe the question is between a schematic design and even an earlier concept design. We can talk more a little bit about that, but I suggest two things that are not really part of the question, which is that we should have a process to review the design progress. Regardless of whether we get at concept designs or schematic designs, it is very important, and I think this point was made well in our forum yesterday by the architects, that establishing a process to review the design progress is going to be paramount to this commission and for the public benefit. Because
Are you talking post-licensing?
yes,
Post-licensing,
even post-licensing. Because the design will progress. There will be instances where unforeseen costs appear, and the design team has all the incentives at that time to value engineer, to change the design, to eliminate certain things where that may not be acceptable to this commission or the host community. The only way to do that is by having that protocol. Now, Along with the drawings, there are two very important pieces of information that go perfectly well in that design review, and that is a cost estimate, and I argue a statement of work. And a statement of work is simply a narrative that complements the pictures of either a conceptual design or a schematic design, where they articulate in detail what are going to be the goals. The architects yesterday were referring as the goals, but they could articulate and superposing both a cost estimate, a narrative, and a design will give the most tools, really the only tools there are, to cross-reference anything that may be misunderstood and later taken out. So I'm making the argument that whether we allow for conceptual level or whether we require a schematic design level, which, by the way, I understand from the architects that this would be entirely feasible and not all that expensive for proponents, that they be complemented with a detailed cost estimate as well as a narrative or a statement of work. Those three components, as they progress through time, as they change, we will be able to ascertain if a cost has diminished significantly or increased significantly. We cross-reference back to the design component that is driving that cost, and that's how we, for our experts really, because I don't suggest we do this, we'll be able to ascertain major changes in the design. Does that make sense?
It does make sense.
Does that formula that you just articulated, does the formula that we're looking for in terms of the completeness of the plans, or the desirable, necessary completeness of the plans, does that compare with the kind of detail that's necessary, for example, to get state funding for a building? You've had a lot of experience
Yes,
in that area.
actually, thank you. At the School Building Authority, there was a lot of discussion about when we set up the program initially. The prior administrator of the program accepted conceptual design level of drawings. And those had a tendency of going way over budget. And those, and so the tension was clearly, as a funder, as a grantor of monies, the tension was, we need you to do as much work as possible prior to any commitments from a grant. So they wanted to pay their architects.
Right.
Cities and towns wanted to not
Right.
spend a lot of money
Right.
paying the architect
Right.
because there was no promise of a
Right.
grant.
Right.
There's a parallel here. A developer may be incentivized to not spend a lot of money prior to award of a license, or from a design perspective. But there's other other forces working in our favor, if you will, mostly relative to permitting and host and surrounding community agreements that will force really an applicant to spend money on studies and design type work, even prior to the assurances of a license. So, but the tension is I think clear. The more level of design that we were to require, the more uncertainty, because there's no award of a license, whereas the developer may be pulling in the other direction. So because of that, I believe, and back to your question about the School Building Authority, they settled essentially with a schematic design, but a robust schematic design level of design. And the way to really complement it, which proved to be very useful, were these two other pieces. Not just the design, but the cost. And so you can tell me all of these components of cost, where do they relate to the drawing? And when you show me a narrative, and when you show me a later design with a differential in cost, I'm going to be able to call out what you may have been value engineering. In other words, if you
Yeah.
price the
No,
pool
I
at,
got it.
at $10 million and now it's costing $5, tell me why, if the design progresses.
So we're not funding this project. We are concerned, so it's not our money that's going in, it's not our money that's at risk. It's the developer's money that's at risk. But we're still concerned with the financial viability of the project that's being proposed. So I guess my question is, does this formula that you're proposing, it sounds good, does that suffice to ensure our ability to assess the financial viability of the project without doing the kind of extra step that probably would be necessary if it was our money that was going to be used to build it?
In other words, would we allow a conceptual design level, an earlier design, if you will, complemented by a cost estimate and a narrative?
Would we, yeah, in other words, is somewhat less information than a funder would require sufficient for our purposes in determining the viability of the project?
Yes, technically yes.
And is this proposal that you're making, to complete that question, somewhat less than a funder would require?
Yes.
Oh, I thought you were saying the same thing used at the SBA.
No, I'm saying it could be a conceptual, a robust conceptual.
You said
Or a
robust
schematic,
Oh.
or a schematic.
I thought you said robust schematic.
No,
Okay, well, I'm going to stop just a second.
Commissioner, the schematic, I'll use that word, I'm not sure if it's correct, that we looked at earlier in the week of a proposed casino project, which included landscaping and detailed floor plans, elevations, all of those things. Is that, would you consider that a concept?
it was a robust concept.
Okay.
I would call it, I mean, they were labeled conceptual designs.
Okay.
Um,
But that's what you're referring to,
Yes.
something of that level of detail?
That's right. A key component here is dimensions. It's one thing to look at perspectives. They are what they are. But it's another to say 24 floors and hence this height and this much area with square feet of roof and of floors, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't want to split hairs necessarily, but what I'm really talking about is either a very robust conceptual level or a schematic design. And my recommendation is on a schematic design because that is widely understood in the industry. Show us a schematic design level.
Okay, but don't change, because you're recommending a schematic design.
Yes.
Earlier on, just now you said a concept design, but a robust one.
Yes.
So you really, but you mean, you're going with the industry definition.
Yes.
You're talking about a pretty substantial schematic design along with these two add-ons.
Correct.
Right. Is there any sort of SOP in the industry? Is Commissioner Zuniga talking about what's standard for the decision-making?
I think it's pretty much standard
Yeah.
in the industry. I mean, you're going to look at these things from a number of different perspectives, both the merits of the design, and then again, when it gets closer to operational things from a security surveillance perspective to make sure the operational requirements are met, and that was something that is routinely done in the industry.
And I would just add to it, as Commissioner McHugh mentioned, the lenders themselves will demand certain assurances in terms of what the project's going to be involved, and you will have access to that material for cross-checking and so forth. So the robust conceptual you're talking about has many qualities in it that satisfy a schematic definition, but in addition to, as you mentioned, the cost and adding on a couple of additional things, there would be additional steps that the commission would prudently require, such as detailed curriculum vitae of the proposed constructors, okay, to make sure that they've performed projects of this size and have the wherewithal and both financially and practically to perform the projects. So all of that would be taken into consideration, and each individual project obviously will have a certain level of detail, but like we showed you earlier in the week as just an example, those things contained a fair level of detail. I mean, even things such as surveillances and security mechanisms and locations of things, plus statutory requirements, can all be laid out, and it would fall somewhere between conceptual and schematic, but probably closer to the schematic definition and conceptual. I'm sure they are, but I don't know about the individuals.
Are the, in some, I just don't recall the statute here, but are the construction companies part of the licensing process for vendors?
Yeah, we have the
I
ability
believe
to.
Oh, yeah,
so,
it's in the
yes.
statute.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
So that's another, yes.
Yeah.
So it seems to me the objective here is, A, so that we know what we're getting in terms of a facility, and B, that we can substantiate the cost that we're being told is the capital investment that's going in. And it sounds like from an industry standard, two sides of it, industry standard, what is being spec'd out here would give us the ability to genuinely understand what we're getting and to a large extent corroborate the alleged capital cost.
That's correct,
Right.
absolutely.
Okay. Thank you. Do you want to?
I know it says in the paper a schematic design level, but I was prepared, and I'm prepared to recommend either a robust conceptual design or a schematic design. My larger points, which I know are not unnoticed, are relative to a process for design review and additional documents that will be part of the submission. Also through the life cycle, and that is a statement of work, and the statement of work comes at the beginning, and the cost estimates along with the design phases as they progress.
But if schematic design is a term of art that architects and everybody else will understand, isn't it better to go with that in terms of trying to clarify what we're looking for?
That's the safer.
Right.
That's the safer piece. I would note too that it's also a level that is often agreed to in design-build contracts, which is also a likely will be the delivery system here.
So you're recommending that the level of design would be a schematic design level as defined by understood by AIA, along with a statement of work and a detailed cost estimate.
Correct.
Okay.
And in addition, that we establish a process for review
Right.
of the design evolution.
Right, I agree, okay.
Second.
So moved, second, okay. Any further discussion? Makes sense to me. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask for a brief break. If we're going to try to get everything done today, I have one other question that I was preparing for tomorrow, so I just need to work on this for a second.